Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Jennifer. I'm the community advocate with Volunteers of Legal Service. And today we're hoping to have a conversation on DACA. And before starting, I'd like to also introduce a very special someone who also works with me. Emma, would you like to introduce yourself?
My name is Emma. I'm the Immigrant Justice Corps Fellow and Staff Attorney with Volunteers of Legal Service Immigration Project.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
And so we can go ahead and look at our agenda for today. These are the topics we're going to be covering today. So what is DACA? Who is eligible for DACA? Changes to the DACA program, DACA in the Supreme Court, and some frequently asked questions. So how DACA came to be. So just to make sure, DACA is a simplification of Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. It is really the result of young immigrants fighting for immigration reform that has taken over decades at this point. It's also a result of a congressional failure to pass the DREAM Act, which was first introduced in 2001. We're in 2020, so it's definitely been a while. So I also want to make sure to make clear that the DREAM Act is not DACA, and the DREAM Act, there's different versions, right? So we have one now at the state level, the New York State DREAM Act, not to be confused with the federal DREAM Act, okay? So the federal DREAM Act would have included it's a legislative proposal that would have provided immigrant youth in the US a path to citizenship. So what is DACA? DACA is an executive order issued under the Obama administration on June 15, 2012. DACA is not a law, it is an immigration enforcement policy. Emma, would you like to elaborate, please?
So as you've laid out here, it's an immigration enforcement policy, which means it's an exercise of prosecutorial discretion, which is an extremely complicated way to say that it's a decision that Homeland Security is making to not pursue deportation proceedings against people who have DACA. So it's a decision not to pursue a case. It's not in and of itself what's known as a legal status.
Mm-hmm. And I'd also like to point out that the Department of Homeland Security is made up of 3 sub-agencies, which is ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement. It's also made up of Customs and Border Patrol, CBP, and USCIS, United States Citizenship and Immigration Services. Okay. And now this illustrates a 100-mile zone where Border Patrol agents have certain additional authorities. For instance, Border Patrol can operate immigration checkpoints where the red indicates here on this map.
And we've received a lot of questions from individuals who have DACA about whether or not going into those zones is acceptable. And it's something that I think it makes sense to talk to a lawyer about if you have concerns. Obviously, DACA does protect you because it is an exercise of prosecutorial discretion, like we talked about. But every case is different, and it also depends on who you're traveling with. If you're traveling with undocumented family members, it's going to be less safe than if you're traveling with a group of U.S. citizens.
And not that many people are doing a lot of traveling these days, but it's something to keep in mind. Yeah. And yeah, something that we would also like to point out is that the Real ID deadline is extended. So before, the deadline was October 21st of 2020 of this year. The new deadline is October 21st of 2020. So what is DACA? So DACA is a permit, right, that lasts for 2 years. It provides deferred action, which is just protection from deportation, work authorization. It's renewable, but it's also subject to termination at any time. Again, just pointing out the fragility of this permit. It's nothing that is permanent. It also provided advanced parole which is no longer available. When it was available, people could travel under 3 subcategories: for humanitarian reasons, educational reasons, or employment reasons. DACA applications are reviewed on a case-by-case basis. And again, DACA is not a lawful status, and it does not provide a path to citizenship. Oh, criteria. I know this can be very tricky. But before we go over criteria, I just want to make sure that people understand that no new applications are being accepted as of September 5th of 2017. Having said that, let's review some of this criteria. One of them has to do with age, right? So a person has to be under 31 years of age as of June 15 of 2012. The person has to have entered the US before their 16th birthday and be at least 15 years old to apply, unless you were in a deportation proceedings or had a final order of removal.
And there's also requirements to have residence in the United States. Individuals who were granted DACA had to have lived in the US since June 15th, 2007. Had to have been physically present in the US on June 15th, 2012, when DACA was initially announced, and had to not have lawful status on June 15th, 2012.
There was also educational and criminal record criteria. So a person had to be in school, they had to have graduated or obtained a GED, or have been honorably discharged from the US military, have no felony convictions or significant misdemeanors, or 3 or more other misdemeanors. And they should not pose a threat to national security or public safety, which is really at the discretion of the officer reviewing your application.
So we're already in a pretty narrow group of people.
Yeah. Good point, Emma. I think it's important to also emphasize that there's a lot of people that were left out because of the eligibility criteria, right? And we can review some of these cases to give you an example of that. So first, let's look at Isabella. She's 24 years old. She entered the US when she was 16 years old and has been living in the US since January of 2012. She graduated college, has no arrest. Can she apply for DACA? Sadly, no, because she did not enter the US before her 16th birthday.
And looking at Victor, who's 17 years old, who entered the United States on June 17th in 2007 when he was 4 years old. He's currently enrolled in high school. Could he have applied for DACA when the program was open? And unfortunately, the answer is no, because he entered 2 days late, June 17th, 2007.
And now let's look at Evan. He is 15 years old. He entered the US January of 2007. When he was 2 years old, he is enrolled in high school and has no arrest. Can Evan apply for DACA? Yes, he meets the age, residence, education, and criminal record criteria. Okay, and what has DACA done for people, right? So the status has been issued to roughly 800,000 people. And they're really from all over, right? So there's Mexico, Guatemala, South Korea, Philippines, India, Venezuela, Jamaica, all over. It's provided social security numbers. It's provided access to certain internships, scholarships, limited public benefits, driver's licenses, prior to the green light bill that passed here in New York. It also allowed people to travel abroad before September of 2017, and it stopped the accumulation of unlawful presence, which can be very important for people who are looking to adjust their status if they have family members here in the US who are legal permanent residents or US citizens. And it's important to consult with an attorney to see how this may apply to you. Great. and DACA after Trump. It's really up until this day, we still there's still a roller coaster of emotions that are happening, right? So during the presidential campaign, Trump said that he would end DACA on his first day in office. As a result, there was a lot of fear, and people were hesitant to apply for DACA. But once he was in office, a few months in, he said that he supported Dreamers. And then a couple months after, on September 5th, 2017, DACA was rescinded. Since then, no new applications are being accepted. So let's talk about a little bit about the lawsuits, right? As a result of DACA being rescinded, a lot of immigration advocates sued the government, but it's important to take in mind that we were challenging the way the Trump administration terminated DACA. Again, DACA was never a law, and so advocates tried to push back on the way on the explanation the Trump administration provided as to why they were changing this policy. According to the lower courts, the Trump administration explanation as to why he was ending DACA was not adequate because it didn't explain why it was a bad policy. The lawsuit is not about whether DACA itself is constitutional or not. It's not about whether a president had the power to implement it or whether a president had the power to terminate it. Again, DACA was really never a permanent solution to start with. Lawsuits continued. So in early 2018, federal courts ordered USCIS to continue accepting DACA renewals. On November 12th of 2019, the Supreme Court heard oral arguments on the 3 cases challenging the DACA termination. And a decision is expected anytime between today and mid-June. So when will the decision be made? Sadly, if there wasn't enough reason to hate Mondays, right, there's a decision can come down really any Monday in June. We made it through June 1st, but a decision can also be made June 8th, June 15th, June 22nd, or the 29th. There's really no way to know. We just have to stay up to date with everything that's going on.
And we should say we're recording this on Friday, June 5th. So really, we just don't know when it's going to happen. The Supreme Court's pretty unpredictable.
Yeah. We suggest that anyone renew their DACA as soon as possible if they had DACA before, if they have DACA now, right? You can continue to renew as long as you met the initial requirements, as long as you haven't left the US without advance parole, as long as you haven't engaged in anything that would make you ineligible. And USCIS is still processing DACA renewal cases even as we go through a pandemic. They are not scheduling biometric appointments where they would take your photo and your fingerprints. They are reusing fingerprints from your last renewal. And remember, you can renew up to 1 year before your permit expires. And if you do need help, please contact us. My contact information is on the screen. You can also contact our immigration project director. Her contact information, email, and phone number is also on the screen. There is scholarships to help you cover the fee if that's something that you need. And we can also look at other possible immigration options you may have. So what are the possible outcomes? Yeah, Emma?
I wanted to say the fee is still almost $500.
Yeah. One possible outcome is DACA continues. A person can continue to renew every 2 years. New applications may be accepted, which means a whole new group of people may be eligible, right? Advanced parole may become available again, and it may be important in order to show proof of how you entered the US if you didn't have proof before, especially if you have an immediate family member who is a US citizen. If DACA continues, the Trump administration can find another way to cancel DACA. So again, DACA was never a permanent solution, right? So what can we do? It's just to keep fighting for citizens, for dreamers and their families. What's the second possible outcome? DACA is canceled. No one will be able to apply for the first time, and people will not be able to renew either. Eventually, work authorizations will expire. Most likely, we suspect that a person's work permit is not going to be cut off immediately, but people's permits will gradually expire. If DACA is canceled, it's possible that ICE could try to reopen closed court cases and detain people with old deportation orders. So what can we do now? Renew your DACA as soon as possible. Remember, if you have it now or if you've had it in the past and maybe it's expired for a year or two, you can still renew. It's important to talk to a lawyer about getting any records or permanent options or explore possible defenses. We should all continue to fight and advocate for immigration reform. And it's important to do what you're doing now if you're watching this video, right? So keeping yourself informed, getting knowing your rights, and sharing that information with your family, friends, and neighbors. We can go over some frequently asked questions. Emma, would you like to cover the first one?
Absolutely. So one of the questions we've been getting a lot is how likely is it that DACA is going to survive Supreme Court review? And our answer is that it's complicated. There's 9 judges on the bench. 5 traditionally are conservative. We don't know which way they're going to go on this, and we also don't know how much they're going to take into account the current situation where we are experiencing mass unemployment and a pandemic that's sweeping across the nation. So it's unclear to us. I think the best thing we can say is to remain hopeful and be prepared.
The second question we've had is, if DACA is terminated, is there a pathway to citizenship? There is no one answer for everyone. It really depends on your personal circumstances. And so we highly encourage you to speak to a trusted immigration attorney to explore what those options are for you.
If DACA ends, does this mean I'll be deported? You will not be automatically deported. They couldn't possibly do that. There's 800,000 people who have DACA right now. However, if DACA is taken away, there is now a risk of deportation, and it's going to be like before DACA existed in the first place. So once again, it's good to talk to a lawyer and see what your options are.
Fourth question is, does being an essential worker help me keep DACA? Not necessarily. So immigration advocates have submitted a brief explaining the vital role that documented workers have in fighting COVID-19. And so as Emma explained earlier, we hope that the judges take the current circumstances into consideration.
If the Supreme Court ends DACA, can I continue collecting unemployment benefits? And the answer to that question is that you can continue to collect unemployment benefits as long as your work permit is valid. And when that expires, you're no longer eligible for unemployment benefits.
What do I do if DACA ends and my work permit expires? Most likely, people won't be able to renew if DACA ends. And this is why it's important to renew early and to buy yourself some more time. In terms of notifying your employer, it's not your responsibility to let them know. So that's something to keep in mind as well.
So as we've said several times, there's a pandemic on right now. And what does the process look like of renewing during a pandemic? The first step is a consultation, a forms appointment where we're going to work with you to fill out the forms. Forms review over the phone or over Zoom if you have the technology available. And then we'll find a way to get signed forms from you to our office and submit them to USCIS. One more frequently asked question we wanted to address as well that didn't make it into the slide, but there's been questions about the stimulus payment and whether if DACA is ended and work permission expires, if people are going to need to return that stimulus payment to the government. And to the best of our knowledge, the answer to that question is no. You do not need to return the payment that you received. The stimulus payment is yours to keep. So if you've already used it, don't worry about that.
And so that was the end of our presentation. And again, feel free to contact us with any questions you may have. Before we end our session today, we understand it is a difficult time for everyone. We have a pandemic going on, and there's an upcoming Supreme Court decision on DACA. But we also want to acknowledge that we stand in solidarity with the Black Lives Matter movement.
We'd like to end our session today with a moment of silence in honor of the countless lives that have been lost to senseless police violence and brutality across this country over many, many years.